Maureen Hartnett, Hartnett. I'm a forensic scientist too with the Criminalistics Unit and Crime Scene Response Unit at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
How long in total have you been with the Massachusetts State?
Approximately 8 years. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Bridgewater State University. I have a Master of Science in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven. I was then hired by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory. In 2004, I was originally hired as a temporary employee in the CODIS unit. I collected blood samples for the DNA database. I was trained on how to properly collect and seal those samples. Currently, I'm a forensic scientist too in the Criminalistics Unit and Crime Scene Response Units. A Forensic Scientist 1 is still in training at the Crime Lab.
Did you start as a Forensic Scientist 1 when you came into this particular unit?
Yes, I did. It took me approximately 9 to 10 months to be signed off to be a Forensic Scientist 2. During that time period, we are being trained in the various types of analysis that we'll perform in the Criminalistics Unit. The training is broken up into modules, which addresses each type of analysis. At the end of each module, we take a written exam, an oral exam, and a hand-on practical exam. Once each module is successfully completed, we'll move on to the next module. In the Criminalistics Unit, I examine items of evidence submitted by law enforcement personnel or crime scene responders for the presence of biological fluids such as blood, semen, and saliva, as well as trace materials such as hairs and fibers. I also perform gunshot residue collection and damage analysis. For the Crime Scene Response Unit, I respond to crime scenes. I document crime scene or test evidence, preserve the evidence, and then transport that evidence back to the crime lab. A crime scene is any location that may contain evidence related to a crime. Criminalistics training, I completed modules on body fluid identification such as blood and semen, trace analysis, identification of hairs and fibers, pattern evidence such as bloodstain pattern evidence, as well as damage analysis. I received training in proper documentation using sketches and diagrams of the scene. I also received training in trace collection at crime scenes as well as gunshot residue collection at crime scenes. Accreditation is a voluntary quality assurance process that the laboratory is a part of, or an outside body evaluates our crime lab to ensure that our personnel, procedures, and instruments are held to certain scientific standards. Our laboratory is accredited by ANAB, which stands for ANSI National Accreditation Board, and ANSI is another acronym, American National Standards Institute. We are audited, I want to say every 2 years, but I'm not 100% sure. They come out to the lab and they go through certain systems or have a certain scope in which they audit us. We also do internal audits as well.
That accreditation that was up to date in the month of January of 2022?
Yes, it was.
And is it up to date currently as well?
Yes. Every assignment that I complete goes through both a technical review process and an administrative review process. A technical review process is done by an independent analyst, either a peer or a supervisor, who will look through my file and determine whether or not they can come to the same conclusions that I came to based on my notes. Proficiency tests are given in the different types of analysis that we do at the lab to ensure that we are maintaining our competency in that type of analysis. For biological fluid identification, I take 2 per year. For trace identification, I take 1 per year. For crime scene response, I take 1 per year.
These proficiency tests, are they required by the accrediting body, ANAB?
Yes, they are.
And did you take a proficiency test in hair and fiber identification in 2022?
Yes, I did. That was successfully completed and required a remediation. I had an inconsistent answer with the expected laboratory result. After the inconsistent answer was identified by my technical leader, we had a verbal discussion about why I came to the conclusion I did. More specific, each item had 2 samples. One of the samples for item 4, I determined as being a human hair without a root, when in fact the root was present. We had a discussion on how I came to that conclusion, and then she then mounted that hair back on the microscope, and we discussed different ways that I could have come to the correct conclusion.
During that remediation process, were you permitted to continue to perform casework during that time?
Yes, I was permitted to continue to perform casework in hair and fiber identification. However, I was temporarily asked to not perform technical reviews of my peers' work on hair and fiber identification.
And prior casework that you had completed, evaluated to verify that the previous reports were issued correctly?
Yes, they were. No previous casework was affected by this error.
Have you since completed additional proficiency tests in hair and fiber identification?
Yes, I did.
And what were the outcomes of those subsequent proficiency tests?
Those were successfully completed without needing any additional remediation.
As far as the remediation was concerned, if you could just explain to the jury sort of what issue was and what that remediation process looked like.
I received 4 items in hair and fiber identification. Each of 4 consisted of 2 items. One was a hair with a root. The other was also a human hair with a root, but I had said the root was absent. That was due to the fact that I didn't see anything like that under the microscope. It was something that was new to me. My technical leader reviewed that hair with me under the microscope. She showed me various characteristics such as the loss of scale pattern and the soft appearance of the root, which I thought was damage. Because we had this discussion and I agreed with the different characteristics that she showed me, she then gave me several hairs, both with damage and with roots, so that I could basically continue to understand the difference of what I was looking at. Once she looked at all my notes and agreed with everything that I had done, she then issued me an additional test to demonstrate my continued competency in this.
How many criminalistics cases have you processed?
Over 1,000.
How many scenes have you processed?
I responded to approximately 150 scenes, 80 of which I was the lead investigator on.
How many exams have you completed with regard to motor vehicles?
Approximately 65.
How is it that you test for blood?
Normally I would test for blood by locating a visible red-brown stain or an area that may contain blood. I perform a screening test, which is not specific to blood, but other items may also come up positive for screening tests. If that screening test is positive, I go on to perform a confirmatory test.
Explain to the jury what it is that you do in performing that screening test.
The screening test is a 2-step process. I take a cotton swab, which I apply sterile water to. I take that cotton swab and apply it to the area that I would like to test, and then I add my 2 chemicals to the swab. Depending on what type of screening test I perform, there'll be a color change, either blue or pink for blood.
With regard to the confirmatory test, can you explain to the jury what does that consist of?
If the screening test is positive, I'll go on to perform a confirmatory test, where again, a cotton swab is applied to the area of interest, or I may take a cutting depending on what the substance is. I then add a chemical to that cutting or swab, and the liquid portion is added to a test card, something similar to a COVID test or a pregnancy test. The liquid is spotted at one end of the card and it flows up the strip. If there's 2 lines, it's positive. If there's 1 line, it's negative. QLIM stands for quantity limited, which means that the sample, if it's being sent forward to DNA, would not be able to be divided in 2. Typically, we divide each sample going forward to DNA into 2, one to be tested in our DNA unit and one to be preserved for future testing. If an item is deemed QLIM, it means that the entire item will be used up in the DNA processing.
February 2nd, 2022, were you dispatched to the Canton Police Department?
Yes, sir.
What time of day it was that you arrived at the Canton Police Department?
I believe it was approximately 9 a.m.
Who were present at the Canton Police?
Trooper Proctor, Trooper Dunn, and Trooper Clark from Crime Scene Services Unit.
Were there other members of the state police that arrived in that area as well?
Yes.
Was one of them a reconstructionist named Trooper Paul?
I'm not sure what the name was. I do know that the reconstruction team did come on after I arrived.
Where within the Canton Police Department were you directed to go?
I was directed to the Canton Police Department garage.
When you got to the garage, what specifically did you observe there and what were you asked to do?
I was asked to examine a black Lexus SUV.
Did you then examine that black Lexus SUV?
Yes, I took notes as I was examining it.
You mentioned Trooper Clark as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Is he from the Crime Scene Services section within the State Police Lab?
Yes.
What was he doing with reference to the black Lexus while you were making your observations or while you were conducting your work?
I believe he was taking photographs.
And you on a May approach?
Yes.
I'm showing you a 3-page document. What do you recognize it to be?
It looks like diagrams that I had taken at the scene. However, it appears to be missing some information.
Ms. Hartnett, you had taken notes on those diagrams when you were at the Canton Police Station in the garage?
Yes,
That diagram that you have before you does not contain those notes, is that correct?
that's correct.
But as far as the diagrams that you are taking notes on, or a form of those diagrams?
The make is a Lexus. The model is LX570. The year was 2021. The registration is Massachusetts 3GC684. The VIN number is JTJF1M434347. The exterior color is black. The interior color is tan. The registrant is Karen Reed, and the exam location was Canton PD Garage.
With reference to the diagram that you took notes on, do you have a copy of that with you today?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would ask that the witness be allowed to take that out just to, as far as the testimony related to the diagram. I would ask we could display what's now been marked as 137 on the screen. What you observed and what you made note of in reference to your observations of the black Lexus on February 2nd.
My notes, I had the vehicle was in overall good condition, and there was damage noted on the rear passenger side area. So that's not viewable in this particular diagram.
As far as the damage that you noted in the right rear passenger area,
I noted there was a dent in the trunk door, there were scratches on the rear bumper, and there was a broken taillight.
now, from the diagrams that are up on the screen right now, page 2 of what's been marked as 137, if you could, using that laser pointer, each of those observations you made and where they were in relation to the document.
To the dent, the rear door was in this area, the broken taillight was here, and then there were some scratches on the rear bumper as well. I observed an apparent hair on the rear quarter panel about here, and I also noted some pieces of glass on the rear bumper. Excuse me, apparent pieces of glass. At that time, I noted that it was an apparent hair because I had not done any microscopic observation of the hair.
Did you do that microscopic examination of the hair that you observed in the rear area of that Lexus SUV?
Yes,
And where was that performed?
that was performed back at the lab.
The item was secured by yourself, taken back to the lab, and examined microscopically.
Yes.
With reference to what you termed as the apparent glass in the rear bumper, why is it that you use that terminology when you're making those observations of it in the garage?
I did not have any confirmation that it was glass. We refer to it as apparent glass and preserve it for the trace unit. Certain items will be examined in the trace unit for identification. The criminalistics unit does not perform glass identification. That would be done in the trace unit. They also will look at other items such as plastic and hair.
Ms. Hartnett, what's up on the screen, the third page of the diagram? What significance did you note in this area of that?
I noted the items that were located within the vehicle. There were some boxes on the back seat of the vehicle. There was also a package in the vehicle and some clothing and miscellaneous items in the trunk.
Now, as far as the items that were contained within the trunk, how high up the rear window of the trunk area? Was there anything obstructing that?
I don't recall at this time.
I'm going to show you initially a set of 18 photographs. I'm just going to ask you, generally speaking, if you recognize what is contained there. Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, these are photographs of the black Lexus SUV that I examined at the Canton Police Department.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, that is a picture of the license plate of the black Lexus SUV. That is the front end of the Lexus SUV.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, that's the exterior of the Lexus SUV.
This is inside of the garage of the Canton Police Station.
Yes.
In addition to the vehicle, is it what the inside of the garage looked like when you were there that day on February 2nd?
Yes.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen there?
Yes, it's like the front passenger side of the Lexus SUV.
Do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph as well?
Yes, the driver's side.
Do you recognize what's in this photograph?
Yes, that's the rear driver's side of the black Lexus SUV.
Do you recognize this as well?
Yes, that's the rear of the black Lexus SUV.
The caution tape was around the vehicle at the time that you first came into the garage.
Yes, so there's damage here on the bumper, and there was also damage to the rear door. I think it may be blocked by the caution tape.
So looking now at what's been marked Exhibit 147, it's coming out. With reference to the damage that you were talking about that may have been blocked by the caution tape in the prior exhibit, do you see that in this exhibit?
Yes,
Again, using a laser pointer, draw the jury's attention to where in this exhibit you observed that damage.
right here. It's on the rear door right underneath the window. I complete an overall visual examination of the vehicle, noting any image or anything that stands out that should be recorded. Then look for any stains or material that is on the vehicle, specifically any transfer that could have been left behind by a victim. I'll then perform testing on any stains that I note or any areas of interest, and then collect anything that needs to be collected. I was informed that this vehicle may have been involved in a hit and run. I was requested to examine it for biological material. Informed that the victim had scratches on his arm, as well as the fact that the car had been towed through a blizzard. I performed blood screening on the lower lying areas of the undercarriage on each side of the tire flap, as well as the edge of the bumper and the exhaust pipe.
What were the results of that testing that you performed there in the garage?
Those were negative.
What evidence did you collect?
I collected the apparent glass from the rear bumper. I collected a paint standard from the area of damage on the rear door. I also collected a paint standard from the area of damage on the rear bumper, as well as the apparent hair from the rear quarter panel and I collected the taillight housing from the vehicle. Observed the apparent glass on the rear bumper.
It's now been marked as Exhibit 153. Do you recognize this?
Yes,
That area that you recovered is apparent human hair. Do you see the location of that within this photograph?
Is it possible to zoom in a little bit on the area right next to the right rear tail light? To the best of my recollection, it was in this area.
As far as areas where you observe certain items or where images indicated or observed by you, is that later marked in some fashion?
I note the damage in my notes.
On the physical item itself, is that marked in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, I'll use stickers to indicate areas that I would then refer to back in my notes.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes. These are pictures of the interior of the black Lexus. Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's the driver compartment of the black Lexus SUV.
What is depicted in that photograph, ma'am?
It's the front seat area of the black Lexus SUV.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen there?
Yes, that's the interior of the trunk of the black Lexus SUV.
And do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, these are pictures of the rear passenger area of the black Lexus.
Do you recognize that?
Yes, that's the rear passenger area of the black Lexus. This area here is the broken tail light. There's damage in this area here to the rear tail light.
From the damage that you observed, it essentially wraps around from both the back and from the passenger side of the vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes.
Earlier in your testimony about some stickers or some sort of evidentiary marker that you would put on an item that you're examining, correct?
Correct. There's a letter on the sticker, I believe it's A, that denotes that there's something there that I was going to collect. And right next to that sticker here is the apparent hair that I noticed.
Recognize anything in this photograph? Or
Yes, that's the rear bumper of the SUV. There's pieces of apparent glass here on the bumper.
do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, ma'am?
Yes, the area of the rear passenger side of the vehicle just, I'm sorry, I can't see what the letter is on it, so I'm not sure what that's in reference to.
Gentlemen, if you could, with reference to the two areas up on that first on the one below, can you see better there as far as what the sticker is and what you had noted there?
Yes, I noted there were scratches in that area.
There's another sticker further upward on the vehicle.
That area, I noted the apparent hair.
Sergeant, do you recognize what's contained in photograph 2558, Exhibit 173?
Yes, that is a picture of the apparent hair I noted in the area.
This is Exhibit 176. Sergeant, do you recognize what's depicted in this exhibit?
Yes, that's the damage I noted on the rear door.
I'm showing you a series of 3 photographs. And do you recognize those, ma'am?
Yes, I do. These are photos that I took of the taillight housing back at the lab.
The collection of evidence that you did in this case, was that in conformity with that experience that you have? As far as the hair was concerned, how was that collected?
I would have collected the hair with tweezers, put it in a glassine envelope, and then put that into a larger manila envelope.
Or why is it that you take those steps?
Touching any evidence, I would put on gloves. I'm not sure in this case whether I used disposable tweezers or reusable tweezers. If I used reusable tweezers, they would have been bleached prior to my using them to prevent contamination.
Is that fair to say that it's in an effort to combat contamination?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, with regard to the paint chips or the paint standards from the vehicle, how did you collect those?
Those would have been collected with a disposable scalpel. I use it to scrape off pieces of paint from the vehicle, which are then put in a glassine envelope and a larger manila envelope.
This is a glass from the bumper area of the vehicle. How were those collected?
I collected those with gloves. I may have used tweezers. I don't recall at the time. But again, if I used tweezers, I would have used bleach tweezers or disposable tweezers.
Now, that taillight assembly how was that?
I removed the taillight. Once I had the taillight housing in my possession, I did have trouble disconnecting it from the vehicle, so a police officer on scene did help me disconnect it from the vehicle so that I could properly package it.
What exactly was it that that officer helped you do? Or
I believe he just removed the wires that were in the back of the taillight so that I could properly hold it and didn't have to place it down anywhere.
So you had 2 hands on the taillight?
Yes, I believe I did.
You were wearing gloves, correct?
Yes.
Did that officer touch any area of that part of the taillight?
Not to my recollection, no.
Recall whether or not that officer was wearing gloves himself when he disconnected that wiring?
I don't recall.
Once you removed that taillight, what did you do with the taillight?
I put it into a brown paper bag and then transported it back to the lab, where I then properly secured it in a box with added cushion from additional paper to ensure that no additional damage was done.
With respect to your time at the Canton Police Station, were you presented with any additional evidence by any officers from the Canton Police?
Yes, I was presented with a broken drinking glass that was reported to have been recovered from the scene at 34 Fairview Road. I was also presented with several solo cups filled with frozen red-brown stains.
What did you do with regard to the drinking glass?
I packaged it in a brown paper bag.
With regard to the cups with red-brown stains contained within, what did you do with
I allowed the cups to thaw, and then I took 2 sterile swabs, like something similar to a Q-tip, and collected a sample from the red-brown stains in those cups.
After you took the swabbings from the red cups, what was done with the red cups?
I returned those to the Canton Police Department to store as they saw fit.
Swabbings that you took, what did you do with those?
I secured those in a glassine envelope in a larger envelope, and then transported those back to the lab.
After your examination on scene, you returned back to the lab, correct?
Yes, that's
And what items of evidence did you examine?
I examined the apparent hair from the vehicle as well as the broken taillight.
Items are taken by you from any kind of scene or any kind of place that you're processing, and you bring them back to the lab. What is it that you do with them when you get back to the lab?
When I get back to the lab, I ensure that they're packaged properly, that they're sealed, and they're stored in the appropriate location within the lab. I also enter them into our laboratory information management system so that from that point forward, those items can be tracked throughout the lab.
You come in with sort of a case. Is there some sort of number or something that's associated with the case when you first sort of generate that?
Yes.
Recall the case number you assigned or was assigned?
Yes, I did. The case number at the lab was 22-2184. Each piece of evidence is given an independent lab item number.
With respect to item 3-1 or the taillight, can you explain to the jury the examination process that went into that?
Sure. I prepped my workspace by spraying it down with a 10% bleach solution. I also sprayed down any reusable utensils that I would need to use. I then applied a piece of butcher paper to protect the lab bench and prevent contamination. I put on gloves, my lab coat, and mask before I examined any item of evidence. And then I took photographs of what the packaging looked like and then photograph of the piece of evidence itself.
Did you perform any testing on that item?
No, I did not do any testing on it. No visible red-brown stains on the item, as well as the fact there was a very limited service area for me to from. In addition, I was informed that the car had been towed through a blizzard. So given the fact that there was potentially very limited material on the taillight, if any type of testing that we do would remove additional material. So I made the conservative decision to take a swabbing of the item and send it forward for DNA.
As far as that swabbing of the item for DNA purposes, explain what the process is or how that's done?
Yes, we use a polyester swab, which is a flat spatula-shaped swab. I apply sterile water to the swab and rub the exposed areas of the taillight. And then that swab dries before it's packaged and sent to DNA.
Exhibits 187 through 189.
There's the taillight that I removed from the black Lexus SUV.
Still in the bike, I have 8971, photograph. Now on the screen is exhibit 188. And do you recognize what's depicted there?
Yes, I do.
What is depicted there in addition to the taillight?
The taillight from the black Lexus SUV from a different angle. I am holding up a ruler to show the scale of the item.
Recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
Can you explain to the jury what we're looking at, perspective-wise, and what, if anything, you're doing in this photo?
The back side of the taillight, and again, I'm holding up a ruler to show the scale of the item.
Your initial response to the Canton Police Department, you secured a number of different items, subsequently as items 3-1 through 3-13. Is attention to item -6. That was the apparent hairs.
Yes, per protocol, all hairs that will go forward for DNA are considered Q-lim, meaning that the entire sample will be used up during testing.
Regarding 3-6, the apparent hair, explain the examination process or what it is that you're doing with reference to that piece.
Yes. The apparent hair, and I mount it on a glass slide using deionized water. I then put the slide under a microscope, and I'm looking for certain characteristics to determine if that piece of material is a hair or fiber or some other unknown material. On the exterior of the hair, there'll be scales. Depending on the shape, it can help you determine whether or not the hair is an animal hair or a human hair. Human hair have imbricate scales, which look like overlapping shingles with a wave-like edge. That is what I observed on this hair. In addition, the internal characteristics of the item are looked at. Running through the center of a hair is a medulla, which is a channel. Animal medullas and human medullas look different in that human medullas will have an amorphous shape, which means they don't really have any shape at all, whereas an animal medulla will have can have distinctive patterns within them. Also, the size of that medulla or channel that runs through the center of a hair Human hair is approximately 1/3 the entire width of the hair, where in animals it may be much larger than that. We determined the hair was consistent with the human hair with a root.
The measurements that were done in reference to that?
Yes, there would have to refer to my notes. It was approximately 7/8 inches long. I did not perform any testing.
And why not?
The only done on hairs in the criminalistics unit is a visual microscopic examination.
So where did the hair go from there?
At that point, I hair into two pieces, one end that contains the root and then the remaining end of the shaft. The root end went to our internal DNA unit. The root end is the end that would have been attached to the scalp, and the shaft end is just the remaining outer portion of the hair.
Is it that you're able to determine sort of the difference between the root end and the shaft end?
Through the microscopic characteristics. Under criminalistics protocol, the root end of the hair would be tested internally in our DNA unit, and if potential testing needed to be done on the shaft end, that would be sent out to an external lab.
And do you know why that is?
We don't perform that type of DNA testing at our lab.
And that's something, are you familiar with the term mitochondrial DNA testing?
I am familiar with it, but I don't really have a full understanding of it.
But as far as your understanding is the type of testing that would have had to been sent out to an external vendor, that would be, the type was mitochondrial?
Yes, that was my knowledge at the time, yes.
With regard to elimination of the remaining items in this case, time in May of 23?
Yes. Discussed that I would examine the clothing and some of the other items for biological testing.
-18, which was a gray sweatshirt to Mr. John O'Keefe, correct?
That's correct. Case I was looking to determine if there was any blood present on the item. I also did damage analysis of various areas on the sleeve and the front and back of the item. I also took a trace collection from the item and additional cell collection samples from the item.
7-18, the gray sweatshirt.
There were red, brown, and brown stains on the item. There was damage from the top of the shirt to the bottom of the shirt, as well as across each sleeve of the shirt. I also noted additional damage on the right sleeve.
Now,
I marked each of those areas that I was going to do further analysis on with a number.
and there were essentially 13 different areas on that sweatshirt.
These are the photographs I took of item 7-18, the long sleeve gray shirt.
And those are sort of the preliminary or overall photographs?
Yes.
I just had one follow-up question. And you had been testifying about the difference between the root end and the shaft end of the hair. You had mentioned that the root end is typically something that would be attached to the scalp.
Not necessarily. We don't perform body origin.
The root end of the hair that was attached to the body at some point, whether it's the head, an arm, a leg, you don't know where.
Correct, I do not.
Would recognize that.
Yes, I do. That is the photograph I took of item 7-18. It is the exterior front.
Recognize that as well.
It is the exterior rear of item 7-18.
Recognize what's up on the screen now.
It is the interior front of item 7-18.
Recognize what's up on the screen is Exhibit 193.
Interior back of item 7-18.
Recognize what's up on the screen is Exhibit 194.
Yes, I do. It is the exterior front of item 7-18, and it also contains markers that I placed on the item to note areas of damage.
Next photograph would be 9796. That's the right sleeve of the gray sweatshirt of item 7-18.
These are close-up photos of the areas of damage 1 through 5.
196 through 20.
These are close-up photos of areas 6 through 11 that I noted on the long sleeve gray shirt.
What's contained in these photographs now been marked as exhibits 206 through 217. Those essentially sort of the same close-ups and then a close-up with a measurement that the jury just saw in regard to what you had marked as 1 through 5.
Yes, that's correct.
And this is just 6 through 11 on that same area in the right sleeve of Mr. O'Keefe's sweatshirt.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those?
Yes, these are the areas of damage 12 and 13 on the rear of the sweatshirt.
Photograph 9837.
That's the exterior back of the gray sweatshirt.
The items marked are that you labeled as 12 and 13.
Yes, area 12 and area 13.
Exhibit 219 up on the screen. Is that just a closer image of those areas you marked as 12 and 13? Is that correct?
Yes.
Recognize what's depicted in those?
Yes, I do. These are additional pictures of the sweatshirt in which I've also made some areas that need further testing.
Before I get to Exhibit 222 through 230, the process that you would go through as far as classifying damage to a clothing article.
I look at the macroscopic characteristics of the area of damage, and then I also examine the area of damage underneath the microscope.
And so what would lead you to make that sort of classification as far as something is damaged?
The overall shape. I also look at the fiber. For instance, a tear will have rough fiber ends and possibly separation of the weave of the fabric, or cut, you have even ends without any fraying.
Able to tell from your examination what caused those tears and cuts?
No.
Are you familiar through your training experience with something called an ALS, or an alternate light source?
Yes.
Thank
A light source is a light that uses a different wavelength that enables visualization of some biological fluids that can't be seen necessarily with the naked eye. On this particular shirt, I used that light source around those areas of damage to determine if there was any biological fluids that were fluorescing. The ALS did not show any stains in that area.
You had labeled tears or cuts 1 through 9. Did you do any additional testing or collecting specifically from those areas?
I collected 2 cotton swabs moistened with sterile water around those areas of damage.
And why did you do
Told to me that potentially the victim may have been bitten by a dog during an incident. So I was taking swabs of that area to be sent out to determine if there's any dog DNA on that area. We do not do that type of testing.
that? And is that sent out to an external vendor then?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that something that you had done on any prior cases or any previous situations where you had collected items and sent it out to a specific lab for animal testing?
I did consult once with an external lab on taking those types of collections, but this is the first time I've collected and actually sent something out for that type of testing.
What lab were those items sent out to?
We use the UC Davis Veterinary Lab in California. I emailed Terry Kuhn, who is one of the analysts at the clinic, who aided me in how best to collect the sample for their lab.
What you were directed to do as far as collection, packaging, and shipping, was that at the direction of the UC Davis lab?
Yes, that's correct.
And you performed those functions in conformity with what Ms. Kuhn told you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The items that were sent off to the UC Davis lab, which item were they collected from, and where on that item were they collected?
I collected 2 swabs from the areas around the damaged areas on the right sleeve. I was not taking them from any stains. I did use the ALS to determine if there were any stains there, which I did not visualize. So I was doing that for potential saliva collection from that area.
So away from the collection for the UC Davis lab, in addition to that, what stains did you observe on that article of clothing, 718, the gray sweatshirt?
I also observed numerous red-brown stains on that item of clothing. On each of those stains, I performed a blood screening test as well as a blood confirmatory test. A different screening test was used in the lab than was used at the scene due to a protocol change, but essentially it's the same mechanism. I examined other items of clothing as well.
Attention back is exhibits 222 through 230. 222. Again, you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do.
With reference to your observations of the red-brown stains on that clothing or any other item, were those areas marked with some sticker?
Yes, that's correct. For the red-brown stains on this item, I use letters.
Starting with A and then sort of going through it, is that
That's correct.
Ms. Stillman, if I could have, photograph 9842. And you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, I do. It would be red-brown stain A that I noted on the sweatshirt.
Exhibit 224, do you recognize that as well?
Yes, I do. Those are red-brown stains B and C that I noted on the sweatshirt.
Exhibit 225, to know where B and C were located on the sweatshirt, is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct.
Exhibit 227, is there 2 other stains that you noted as far as D and E on the same item?
Yes, that's correct.
The photographs that you still have before you, recognize generally what's in those photographs?
Yes, I do. Photographs of item 7-17, the orange T-shirt that was belonging to John O'Keefe.
What's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, that's correct.
So with respect to exhibits of the orange T-shirt 7-17,
Yes, that's correct.
so similar to how you had marked off inch or red-brown stains, is that similar to what you did with the orange T-shirt as well?
Yes, that's correct.
And then there were 2 other clothing items that you examined, being a pair of jeans and a set of sneakers. To the jeans, that was marked as item 7-1. Is that
Yes, that's correct. Each sneaker had its own item number. One was 7-3 and one was 7-4.
the jeans showing you a series of 8 photographs? Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
Photographs in the packet from 230 to 241. Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize what's up on the screen that's now been marked as Exhibit 231?
Yes, I do.
When you recognize that, Steve?
That's a photograph I took of item 7-17, the orange T-shirt, and it's the exterior front.
Again, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 232?
Yes, I do. That's the exterior back of item 7-17.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 233?
Yes, I do. I marked 3 specific red-brown stains using these stickers and letters A, B, and C.
Within this zoomed-in portion of Exhibit 233,
I noted red-brown stain, which I marked with the sticker and D on the bottom right.
Exhibit 239, do you recognize that?
Yes, I do. I noted this specific red-brown stain, and I marked it E.
Exhibit 242, do you recognize that?
Yes, I do. That's a photograph of the exterior front of the jeans with the belt, item 7-1.
Did you mark off certain areas of interest on this item as well with respect to the jeans?
Yes, I did.
That's depicted in this photograph.
I marked off red-brown stains A, B, E, and E on the front of those jeans.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
Yes, I do. These are photographs of the sneakers, items 7-3 and 7-4.
Do you recall how or where or when it was that you received each of those respective clothing items?
They were received by the lab on the Norfolk active unit.
The sneakers being labeled 2 different stickers, do you know why that was?
One of the sneakers was recovered from 34 Fairview Road, and one of the sneakers was recovered from the hospital.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs there?
Yes, I do. Those are the fingernail clippings that are submitted for John O'Keefe
And do you know where they were submitted from?
by the Norfolk County Detective Unit.
With respect to each of those, I'm not seeking to publish those to the jury at this time. Ms. Hartnett, with respect to the stains on the gray sweatshirt, the orange T-shirt, and the jeans, what testing was done with respect to those things?
For the sweatshirt, the T-shirt, and the jeans, I saw visible red-brown stains, which I screened for blood. The majority were also performed a confirmatory test for blood. There was one stain on the orange T-shirt, however, that was too small to perform that confirmatory test. So for that instance, I noted that the stain was quantity limited, and I preserved it after the positive screening test instead of performing a confirmatory test in order to preserve enough material for any DNA analysis. As far as the sneakers, given their dark color, I did not see any visible red-brown stains on the black area of the sneakers, so I used an alternate light source to aid in visualizing any potential blood on those sneakers. With that alternate light source, I tested several stains on the sneakers, one of which screened positive for blood.
With respect to the screening test and the confirmatory test for blood, with respect to the gray sweatshirt, orange T-shirt, and the jeans, what were the results of that screening test and that confirmatory test?
The screening test and the confirmatory test were positive.
Did you take any additional samples from those items?
Yes, each of the items I picked up any loose trace material, which would be hairs and fibers that were adhering to the item. I also did a scraping and swabbing for a skin cell collection of the unstained areas, and that involves taking a sterile scalpel and swabbing the areas of the clothing that don't have any visible stains on them, and then taking 2 cotton swabs and swabbing that same area, and then combining those scrapings and swabs for potential DNA analysis. In addition to those, I also took a scraping of each of the materials, and that involves taking the item, using something like a flat metal spatula, and scraping down whatever adhering materials left on the item into a glassine packet.
And they're collected from the clothing. What do you do with them from
Each
there?
of those items is given its own item number. It's a sub-item of the overall larger number used to mark the item, and those are sent to the appropriate units for additional testing.
And what offense are taken in regard to preserving those items once they're removed from the clothing and sent off to the other units?
Each of those items would be preserved according to protocol. They are sealed properly, initial and dated with my initials and date. They're entered into our LIMS system, so those sub-items could then be tracked throughout the laboratory, and they're stored in the appropriate storage unit.
Did you also receive items that were labeled as 3-2 and 3-3?
I submitted those on the original scene.
And what were those, ma'am?
Those are pieces of glass from the bumper and a drinking glass from the crime scene.
Now, did you examine those items?
Yes, I did. I did a visual examination. I took photographs, and then I also took a collection from each of the items.
Did you do any testing on those items?
No, I did not.
And
I took potential skin cell collection using a swab moistened with sterile water. The swabs were preserved for testing in the DNA unit, and the original items, the apparent pieces of glass and the drinking glass, were preserved for the trace unit.
I don't have any further questions. Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Ms. Hartnett, you responded to Canton Police Department. A lot of your testimony was about what happened in the Sallyport.
Yes, that's correct.
You were asked if you responded to the Canton Police Department on February 2nd, and most of your testimony was predicated on that date, you going over there and doing some visual observations, as well as some removal of items and some other testing, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Was it February 2nd or was it February 1st?
My apologies, that was my error. It was February 1st.
Okay. So everything that you testified to, you only went once.
Yes, that's correct.
We should assume it was actually February 1st, the one time you were there.
Yes, I was there one time.
Okay. Were you dispatched to the Sallyport? And I apologize, I'm not yelling at you. I'm trying to keep my voice elevated, so just so you know.
Understood.
It's not my normal speaking voice. You were dispatched at the behest of one of the Massachusetts State Troopers, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The Detective Bureau specifically, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Trooper Proctor more specifically, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Trooper Proctor, you knew at that time to be the lead detective, the person that was in control of the investigation.
May I check my notes who I wrote down as the lead investigator at that
If it
time?
would refresh your recollections.
Yes, I was told on scene that Trooper Proctor was in charge of the investigation.
While you were there, one of the things that you did initially was to just do an overview of the vehicle, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Obviously, that was important given the limited information that you had at that time about a potential motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
Correct.
So looking for anything that would rise to a level of investigative concern regarding that vehicle.
Yes, that's correct.
Hence your review and notation of certain scratches on the vehicle,
Yes.
which may or may not have anything to do with the incident, but you noted it anyway.
I did not draw any conclusions as to where those scratches came from.
Of the dent that you noted and photographed. You made no conclusion that that occurred as a result of a motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
That's correct.
The scratches that you denoted and had photographed, you made no conclusions about that having anything to do with a motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
That's correct.
Even the broken taillight, at that point, you made no conclusions or drew no scientific conclusions about that having anything at all to do with a motor vehicle pedestrian incident, correct?
That's correct.
You did, however, look for tissue, human tissue, blood, biological material, and things of that nature on the car itself. Did you not?
Yes, I did.
In that review, I think you testified that you saw nothing that suggested the transfer of human tissue to the vehicle, correct?
I did not see any visible stains or tissue on the vehicle.
You were told, Ms. Hartnett, that there were scratches on one of the extremities of John O'Keefe, correct?
That's correct.
Were you shown a photograph of those scratches to assist you in your visual view or examination of that vehicle?
Not at that time, no.
To this date, have you seen a photograph of his arm and the injuries to his arm?
Yes, I have.
Do you recognize what's depicted in Exhibit 19?
Yes, I do.
You've seen that pattern of scratches previously.
Yes, I
It's
have.
consistent with the photo that you've seen since your visit to the Sallyport on February 1st, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Did you look at all around the vehicle 360 degrees?
Yes, I did.
Did you look toward the top of the vehicle as well as toward the bottom of the vehicle?
I did not examine the roof of the vehicle.
Did you examine the undercarriage of the vehicle?
I did look at the undercarriage of the vehicle.
And you know what I mean when I say undercarriage.
Yes. The parts that normally you would have to see by, bending over or laying underneath the car to view what's underneath the vehicle.
That would include the frame and the axle and the drive shaft, transmission, things of that nature.
Yes, I'm not confident in all the terminology of the undercarriage, but yes.
Did you see anything that was suggestive of or consistent with the pattern of injury that you see to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm?
I wouldn't say I'm qualified to make any kind of pattern determination and what would match the injuries on his arm.
So the answer to my question is, as you sit here, you made no observation of anything on the AV that matched these injuries, correct?
I wouldn't be able to testify from that from memory. I don't have a photograph of the undercarriage, nor did I make any kind of conclusions about that at the time.
The swabs and samples that you did take variously on the car all came back negative for human tissue, etc.
The testing that I did on scene from the various areas of the undercarriage with the tire flaps, the edge of the bumper, and the exhaust pipe screened negative for blood.
Took swabs of what you believe to be blood evidence contained in Rick's solo cups.
Yes, I noted those as frozen red-brown stains in red cups.
Were those solo cups in any way labeled among themselves? In other words, solo cup 1, 2, 3, 4.
I don't believe they were, but I don't have a photograph of that, so I'm not 100% sure.
You did not thereafter label those solo cups.
No, I did not label them.
How did you take those swabs? Was the swab done in one solo cup, or did you take a swab from all 6, or how did you take those swabs that you ultimately did take?
I took the swabs from one solo cup.
How did you choose which of the 6 solo cups you were going to take a swab from?
I don't recall exactly how I chose which cup. It was reported to me that those cups came from the same area of red-brown staining. You make an assumption that they're all related. From what I was told, it came from one area of red-brown stain at the scene.
And you, of course, know as a criminalist that blood stains can contain multiple contributors.
Yes, that's correct.
You don't know as you sit here which blood stain found at the scene related to which solo cup in the bag.
No, it was my understanding they were all taken from the same stain.
Okay. If they, in fact, were taken from multiple stains, you would have no way of knowing that as you sit.
That's correct.
Once you did take that swab from that single solo cup, what did you do with the rest of that blood evidence?
I left that with the Canton Police Department.
Was there one swab taken from that one solo cup, or were there multiple swabs taken?
There were 2 swabs taken.
Of those 2 swabs, was DNA testing done on either one of those or both of them?
DNA testing was not done on those swabs.
So as we sit here now, there's been no DNA confirmation of who that blood relates to.
No testing done on it at all.
And so therefore we would not know if there were multiple contributors to those stains or that swab that you took from that single solo cup.
That's correct.
Remainder of all of that solo cup, as well as all the other 5 solo cups, was retained at the Canton Police Department in the control of the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, correct?
I don't know who was in control of it once I returned it to the Canton Police Department.
Who did you return it to at the Canton Police Department?
I gave it to a Canton police officer. I don't know which officer that was.
Michael Proctor was at the Sally Port at the time that you were doing your examination, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did he not take control of it himself?
Not that I saw. I don't know who took control of them once I was done with my collection.
They have, you just don't know.
Correct.
That vehicle was not a vehicle that had clearly just come off the showroom floor and had not been in use.
I don't think I'm qualified to make that kind of decision.
It looked like there was some normal wear and tear on the car.
Other than the specific items that I pointed out earlier, the dent and the scratches, the exterior was in overall good condition. So I can't say specifically if it was driven. I don't think I can make that conclusion unless you want to rephrase the question.
You didn't have any reason to believe that car was in any other condition than it had been owned and driven by somebody, right? Could you make that conclusion?
I don't think I can make that conclusion.
So it could have been an absolutely brand new, right off the showroom floor car?
I guess I don't have any understanding of what could have happened to it in the showroom. I'm not sure I understand the line of questioning.
Why don't we move along?
Fair enough. You've done some damage analysis in the past. Obviously, this was not your first rodeo.
I don't do damage analysis of some vehicles.
Did this car look like it had reasonably normal wear and tear on it? That's my question.
I don't feel comfortable answering that question.
Ultimately, the right rear taillight housing was removed, correct?
That's-
You, the person, Ms. Hartnett, who actually used the tools to remove that taillight, be it screwdrivers, switches, anything else?
No. The Canton police officer that had entered the garage and as I was removing it, offered to help. He said he knew how to basically take it out of the housing, which at that point, I was not sure how I would do that.
I'd like to show you an exhibit that you'd been shown just a few minutes ago, 187.
Yes, that's the taillight housing that I submitted to the lab from the garage. I took a swab from that taillight. I took it from the outer exposed areas, which would have been on the outer side of the vehicle when it was intact. I took it from the red area here that would have been exposed.
One swab,
Yes, that's,
multiple areas with one swab, and then submitted that.
yes.
So you don't know as you sit here where, if any DNA was detected, where that DNA may have come from,
No, that's correct.
other than the general housing altogether.
Yes. So then just to finish your previous question, I did,
I didn't mean to-
that's okay. It was just I couldn't see it. So this area here, which would have been the external portion of the taillight. So the areas I did not swab were any areas that would have, when the taillight was intact, been protected by the outer plastic housing of the taillight.
Is your testimony, Ms. Hartnett, that what you just pointed to was the exterior portion of the taillight, bottom left?
No, just this piece of plastic here is the exterior piece of plastic.
And you swabbed that area as well as other areas on the exterior, like the red upper right.
Yes,
DNA test does not differentiate where you swab, just that you swab.
the swab, one collection.
Got it. So we can't define whether the DNA was to the upper right, on the outside of the lens, or some other place that you pointed.
That's correct.
And of course, you're familiar with touch DNA, et cetera. Correct?
Correct.
An item, walk away, sweaty palms, likelihood I just left some DNA on the podium, correct?
Yes, you can transfer skin cells by touching an item.
Indicated that you collected glass, rear bumper of this Reed's Lexus, correct?
Yes, I have it as a parent glass, but it's
Somebody else may have labeled those individual pieces.
possible. I do not label them with three.
Okay, labeled it as quantity one,
That's correct.
one group.
That's correct.
But in that group, under 3-3, there were 5 pieces of apparent glass that you recovered, correct?
I don't have the exact number in my notes, and honestly, it's hard to tell from my picture, so I don't want to say that I saw 5 pieces of glass.
Did you not annotate that somewhere that you recovered 5 pieces?
And I have a photograph of it, but it's difficult to see on this printed page, so I didn't specifically write 5 pieces anywhere.
Well, okay, then let me see if I can do it this way. Instead of pitching, let's catch. The person that you submitted it to would have annotated exactly what the grouping was that you submitted to try to be accurate.
After the item was sent to fingerprinting, then I examined the item, but I didn't write down exactly how many pieces of glass were present. I just took a photo.
And as you sit here, you don't recall necessarily how many pieces you took off that bumper.
The quality of the photo does not allow me to see that at this point.
Okay, to look at that photo with the court's permission, this is Exhibit 168. Can we coming in at this point, and I would ask you, Ms. Hartnett, do you recognize this photo? It's zoomed a little bit. Do you still recognize it?
Yes, I do.
Is that a photograph that you caused to be taken at the Sally Port on February 1st, 2022?
I did request that photo be taken of the apparent pieces of glass.
Okay, you up to a piece.
Sure.
Largest of the pieces, correct?
Yes.
Correct. That none of these pieces of glass were embedded in the bumper.
I had a notation that they were embedded, just they were on the bumper.
Physically perched on top of that hard plastic, correct?
They were just sitting on the bumper, yes.
In your experience, and where Dighton, Massachusetts is,
I know the general area.
how far would you say that is from Canton?
Yeah, half an hour, I'm not exactly sure.
Do your notes indicate that the vehicle was recovered from Dighton and towed back to Canton and placed in the Sally Port before you started your examination?
Yes.
The incident in question took place in Canton.
Yes.
So you knew as you were looking at this vehicle and doing your examination, the vehicle had to have been driven by Canton to Dighton and then towed back from Dighton back to Canton, correct?
Informed that the car was recovered in Dighton.
And ultimately either driven back or towed back. One of the ways, some way it ended up back in Canton. How far would you say Dighton is from Canton?
I'm really guessing, I would say maybe a half an hour. I don't know exactly. I was never in Dighton.
Pieces that we're looking at on the back of this bumper would have traveled, let's call it 60 miles in a blizzard before you saw it.
I don't know when the glass pieces were on the bumper, so I couldn't say.
And of course, you knew that on February 1st, you knew a few days earlier on the 29th, there had been a pretty significant snowstorm here in Massachusetts, correct?
Yes.
Blizzard included high winds, freezing rain, snow, all the good stuff with a blizzard, correct?
The exact conditions of the blizzard.
But irrespective, after all of that, you saw these 5 pieces just sitting perched on the top of the bumper, not embedded in any way. And you recovered those with little bitty tweezers.
Yes.
And on direct examination that you also found a hair on that rear panel, the quarter panel of the car.
Yes, at the time of the scene, I noted it was an apparent hair.
That apparent hair was not sitting on the horizontal bumper, but on a vertical portion of the quarter panel.
That's correct.
Did you find the hair, or was that hair pointed out to you by somebody else?
I believe I located the hair.
How exactly was that hair secured to that vertical panel, if you can explain that?
It didn't appear to be secured in any way. It was just on that quarter panel.
Okay, so it wasn't taped,
No.
it wasn't glued,
No.
wasn't stapled.
No.
It was not affixed in any way whatsoever. It was just perched on that vertical panel of the SUV.
That's correct.
You found this at the same time that you found the glass pieces as well.
That's correct.
So that hair potentially would have had to make that same 60-mile round trip in the same blizzard.
At the time, I don't know when that hair was deposited on the vehicle.
Right. And it didn't take you much to remove that hair.
I picked it up with a pair of tweezers.
It didn't give you any resistance.
Not that I recall.
I'd like to take a look at that hair and tell me if you recognize the first two to be exhibits 165 and 173. Do those appear to be those two exhibits that you earlier saw?
Yes, I don't know what numbers they were, but I do remember seeing these photos earlier.
And then the second two photos, do those appear to be zoomed photos of the same two photographs?
Yes, they do.
With the court's permission, I would ask that the zoomed photos be marked as next in order. We're looking at what's previously been marked as 165. Does that appear to be a photo of the hair?
Would it be possible just to zoom in on that,
Absolutely.
the
This is not
sticker?
a-
And just a little bit, I'm just trying to read the letter on the white marker. Yes, so that, correct.
So that hair looks, as we're looking at it, it looks like almost like a backward C, correct? In other words, it looks like it's more vertical than flat in that photograph, correct?
I would agree it looks like a C on the side of the car.
We could go to exhibit 173. This is the same hair photograph a second time, correct?
If we could, again, just zoom in on that sticker. Yes, that's correct.
Ms. Hartnett, does it look to you like between the first and the second photographs, that hair has moved? No longer an inverted C, but a C.
I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I see the two ends, which may still be making contact with the vehicle. I can't make that determination based on this photo.
Fair enough. Did it appear to you that the hair, which is curled, was making contact with the vehicle on the top point and the bottom point?
I would say from this photo, I honestly can't tell if those two ends are coming off the vehicle or touching the vehicle. I just can't make that determination.
But you would agree that that hair was somewhat precariously perched on that vertical corner, correct?
Objection.
I want to sustain the objection, ask it differently.
We can, Mr. Page, we'll finish with that. With the court's permission, you can take that down. If you take a look at the zoomed photos that have just been marked as 259 and 260 respectively, can you take a look at those side by side? And when you're finished, I'd like to ask you a question or two about those.
Okay.
Does it look from your perspective, seeing those photos side by side, that the hair appears to have gently moved just a little bit between the two photos?
I just don't think I can make that determination. They're taken from different angles. I just don't know. I can see that they have a curl in both, but I don't know which ends are making contact or if the ends are coming off the vehicle.
There's one more exhibit I'd like to take a quick look at and ask you a couple of questions about. With the court's permission, exhibit 195, a shirt.
Okay.
Do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes, I do.
You indicated that you took two swabs from the, quote, area around damage, numbers 1 through 9 of the gray sweatshirt, end quote.
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
I moistened 2 cotton swabs with sterile water, and then I took those 2 swabs. I vigorously swabbed around this entire area. So every area of damage, I swabbed around all of it using the same 2 swabs. So it was one collection from all those areas.
One collection on swab 1 and one collection on swab 2.
I took them exactly at the same time. So I held the 2 swabs together.
Oh.
And as I'm swabbing, I'm rotating the swabs to make sure that all the exterior of the swab is coming into contact with that material in order to collect equal samples, or at least attempt to collect equal samples on each swab.
Okay, we can take that. Thank you. You indicated that this was the first time that you had done swabbing specifically for the purpose of trying to find either canine DNA or animal DNA.
That's correct.
Had you been trained or any teaching about the relationship between keratinized tissue and DNA?
No,
Do you know what keratinized tissue is?
no.
Did you photograph exactly where any of those swabs were taken, or just notate it in your notes?
I notated in my notes that overall photo is the photo that I used to describe the sample that I collected.
And I think it probably goes without saying, you didn't videotape your swabbing technique on that shirt either.
That's correct.
You did include a handwritten note on your report that you found, quote, debris from T-shirt 717 and shirt 718.
I performed a debris collection on each of those items.
There was a note in your report that you had recovered some debris.
That's correct.
And you indicated in your note that the debris was from shirt 717 and shirt 718. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And shirt 717 is which shirt?
The orange t-shirt.
And shirt 718 is which shirt?
The long sleeve gray shirt.
You took scrapings from, and then combined those together and submitted that as the debris that was assigned a new item number 7-18.18.
Yes, that's correct.
You don't know where the debris came from specifically. Could be one, could be the other, could have been a combination of both.
Yes, that's correct.
Did you describe in detail anywhere the actual debris that you found? Little fibers, little hairs, little pieces of green or blue or whatever?
If I was able to pick out a hair or a fiber, I would have attempted to do that from the debris collection. The debris collection was just anything that was left on the item that I was not able to pick off.
Okay. And you did not note any debris item that was plastic or plasticine, anything like that?
No, I did not make any kind of observations on the debris itself.
And there was no marker put on any part of the debris that was recovered, correct?
That's correct.
And there was no photograph taken of the debris?
That's correct.
And there was no videotape of the debris collected?
Correct.
When you received item 717 and item 718, that came in one evidence bag, did it not?
Yes, it did.
Tell me what's depicted in the photograph.
Yes, I do. It's a photo of the brown paper bag that contained the long sleeve gray shirt as well as the orange t-shirt.
I could ask that be marked as next in order.
Any objection?
No, yeah.
This evidence bag is in the condition that it was in when you received it, meaning the writing on the back was already there when you received it.
Yes, that's correct.
And it notes that these items of evidence were collected by Trooper Proctor,
Yes, correct.
and the date of collection was January 29, 2022.
The date on there is January 29th, 2022.
So I don't have to walk back and forth, Mayor. Does that look like what you're looking at? 261?
Yes, that's correct.
You see Trooper Proctor's name on the evidence bag as the person that collected it.
Yes, that's correct.
And it also has a description of what's in the bag, and it shows both the orange t-shirt and the gray sweatshirt collected together and bagged together.
Yes, that's correct.
And the date, again, once again, on the upper right is January 29, 2022.
Yes, that's
Okay. You have no way of knowing, as you sit here, the journey that those two items of evidence took before they got to you in your lab.
Yes, they're tracked as soon as they're entered into our laboratory system by us. The item would be tracked as soon as it's submitted to our lab by us, by the crime lab.
The debris that you ultimately got from the shirt or shirts, you don't know if that debris may have been in the bag and the shirts picked up the debris in the bag or otherwise,
Correct.
because they were housed together,
Yes,
stored together.
that's correct.
Were you aware before you began your analysis that those shirts had been found on the floor of an ambulance?
I don't have any knowledge of what condition the clothing in was before I got it.
You don't have any knowledge personally either one of the shirts or both of them were on the floor of a hospital room as well.
I have no information about where the shirts were.
One of the things that you did indicate in your direct examination was how important it is to maintain sanitary conditions with evidence to avoid contamination.
That's correct.
For instance, you wouldn't want to take the swabs that you so carefully utilized to swab an item of evidence and then, oops, drop it on the floor. You would have to discard that item and then start over.
If a swab is dropped on the floor, we don't discard it. We would preserve it, but that would be a note that we would have to put in our file, and that, yes, that swab would not be tested any further.
Right, because of the possibility of cross-contamination.
Correct.
At least according to the evidence bag, those two shirts were in the custody and control of which trooper before you got them?
Trooper Proctor collected the evidence, according to the bag.
Thank you. Ultimately, Ms. Hartnett, every single piece of taillight material and clothing that you've described in your testimony today on direct and cross-examination, all of that evidence was presented to you or to the lab at one time in one bundle on March 14th, 2022, correct?
No, that's incorrect.
Which portion was in the lab before March 14th?
The tail light that I collected from the vehicle was submitted prior to that, as well as any other items that I took from the vehicle.
Okay, that was a great answer and my mistake. I knew that and I forgot it. So the taillight housing you took on the first?
Correct.
Okay. Every other item other than the taillight housing itself, which you took personal possession of, all the taillight fragments, all the clothing, orange shirt, gray shirt, jeans, shoes, everything, was all submitted in one fell swoop on March 14th, 2022. Is that right?
No.
What else am I incorrect about?
So I just wanted to clear anything that was collected from the vehicle, as well as the swabs from the red Solo cups and the drinking glass that I was presented with at Canton PD, was submitted by me on February 1st. The other items, the clothing items, were submitted together. And then there was another submission that had the fingernails and the known blood standards. So there were several submissions, so I'm hesitant to lump it all into one because it did happen on different dates.
Okay, fair enough. Can we agree that the earliest submission, with the exception of the stuff that you actually took with you from the Sally Port, the taillight material, whatever swabs you took, I'm sorry, the taillight housing and whatever swabs you took, all of the other material that was submitted to the lab, all of the other evidence, the earliest date anything was submitted was March 14th, 2022.
If you don't mind, I'm just going to take another look at my submission forms just to clarify.
May I approach?
Yes.
I think I have it. It's a
Okay.
two-page document, if I can show Mr. Lally. Is that a copy of your submission form?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If you could familiarize yourself with that for just a quick second.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. May I approach one more time now? Tracking on. I have one more document I'm going to ask you to take a glance at.
Okay.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
What is that document, the second document that I just handed you?
This is a printed chain of custody report from our laboratory information management system.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to mark the first document's name again. I want to get it right.
It's the evidence submission form for submission 7.
Evidence submission form for submission 7, two-page document, if I could have that next in order. And then the
Chain of custody. My apologies.
Is there an objection, Mr. Lally?
Yes to both.
So the objection sustained unless you want to convince me otherwise.
I'll have them marked for ID for
Okay.
the time being. That's fine. If that's okay with the court.
Yes.
If you could take a look at what's been marked as VV, that's the log. I just want to go through this relatively quickly.
Okay.
With regard to plastic pieces that were submitted, if you look on page, for instance, page 11, where a tab is,
Yep.
that shows that that piece was submitted on March 14th, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And there was a piece submitted on March 14th on page 12,
Yes, correct.
page 13, another plastic piece,
Yes, submitted on March 14th.
and page 14, another plastic piece,
Yes, that's correct.
page 15, another plastic piece,
Correct.
and page 17.
Yes, that's correct.
And then if you turn to the next page, page 18, that's the orange T-shirt that shows its submission date.
Yes, that's correct. March 14th.
And then on the very bottom of page 20, going into page 21, there's a gray sweatshirt.
Yes, that was also submitted on March 14th.
I'm not sure if I'm going to use it one more time.
Put them up on the bench and you can grab them.
Before you received all of the items that we've talked about and all the items that you've testified about, with the exception of the items that you physically took with you from the Sally Court, everything else that you've testified to was submitted to you on March 14th or after,
That's correct.
and all submitted by Trooper Proctor.
I know they were all submitted by the Norfolk County Detective Unit. I don't know the specific officer that necessarily dropped them off at the lab.
Can you answer the question based on the log information that you have and the chain of custody that's in front of you? Can you answer the question whether Trooper Proctor or anybody else stored the taillight lens material and the clothing in the same place or in the same bag before you received it? Based on the log information that you have and the chain of custody that's in front of you, we can absolutely look at and determine where things were. Can you tell us whether or not Trooper Proctor or anybody else stored any of the taillight material and the clothing in the same place or even in the same bag?
No, I don't have any information to how the evidence was treated before it was received in the lab.
In fact, that's because there is no chain of custody for those items. There's no data for those items predating March 14th.
Objection.
Sustained.
You don't personally have any chain of custody information about those items we just went over predating March 14th.
I personally do not have any data that would indicate where those items of evidence were prior to them being accepted into the lab.
And one of the reasons why you have such detailed chain of custody protocols is to maintain control over where items go and how they're handled and by whom.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Anything, Mr. Lally?
Just a couple. The vehicle that you observed, the defendant's vehicle in the Sally Port of the Camp Police Station, that was in generally overall good condition, other than the areas of damage that you noted on the right rear.
Yes, that's correct.
And when you were swabbing the taillight housing that you then later submitted to DNA, that was a taillight housing that you took from the Camden Police Station.
Yes, that's correct.
You logged that into the lab.
Yes, I did.
You took those swabbings and then you packaged them and you sent them to the DNA.
Yes, that's correct.
Where on the taillight housing did you take them?
I took them from what would have been the exposed area of the taillight, should the taillight have been intact. So I did not collect from any of the interior portions of the taillight. It would have been protected by the exterior plastic piece.
Now, at the time that you were looking at the vehicle in the Sally Port of the Camden Police Station, do you recall what the temperature was inside the garage?
No, I don't have that information.
Was the temperature the same inside the garage as it was outside of the garage? Was it heated at all?
I don't know if it was heated.
As far as the vehicle itself was concerned, when you saw it in the garage, did you see any sort of frozen snow or ice or anything like that on the exterior of the vehicle?
Not to my recollection.
I have nothing further on.
One follow-up question. If you take one more look at that, what's been marked for identification is you. That's the evidence submission form, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Who signed that form?
Objection.
Sustained unless you want to.
Different way. Whose name is on the bottom of the form?
Objection.
It's the same question.
Yes, Your Honor.
May I have?
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, I have no further questions.
All right, Ms. Hartnett, you are all set. Thank you.